What if the tool that promises truth is also a kind of trap for our own minds? Socrates carried a lamp into the attic of Athens and kept shining it on other people's beliefs. And yet the light kept spilling back onto him. The idea of the Socratic method is simple on the surface. Ask questions until you reach a clear answer. But this is not just a technique, it is a stance. It treats every claim as provisional, every certainty as a possible disguise for fear, pride, or habit. In a world hungry for certainty, that stance feels like rebellion, a discipline of doubt that can save you or swallow you whole. SFX, breath, 0. 6. Socrates didn't teach by giving answers. He taught by inviting you to question your own answers, to walk the maze with him until you realize where you stood on shifting sands. His method was a rude mirror, reflecting not only what we believe but how we defend it. He pressed citizens, not to humiliate them, but to expose the scaffolding behind their words. Yet there is a dark side when a mirror stays in your hands longer than your share of light permits. In that ancient forum, clever men traded certainty for a sharper suspicion. The elenchus, that relentless cross-examination, is a tool of clarity, yes, but it can also become a weapon in the hands of someone who craves the final word more than the truth. The more you press, the more you risk turning dialogue into duel, inquiry into indictment. If the other person feels cornered, they don't discover the truth, they double down, they circle the wagons. They improvise a version of themselves that survives the pressure. And in that moment, the method has won a quiet victory over trust. Consider this. Socrates didn't just discover ignorance. He engineered a social dynamic where ignorance becomes a shared predicament rather than a private shame. He asked people to audit their loyalties, to tear down idols, to test the ground beneath their own feet. That is liberating until it isn't. When doubt becomes the primary currency of conversation, communities can drift toward paralysis. If nothing is certain, nothing captured by language can be trusted. Language itself begins to fracture under the weight of perpetual questioning. Yet the darker side is not merely social, it's existential. The mind trained to unpuzzle every assumption risks becoming a hollow place setter, endlessly puncturing ideas without building something new in their place. The questioner can forget to cultivate what lasts, what endures after the debate ends. A culture of incessant scrutiny can hollow out trust, leaving people with a minted coin of skepticism but lacking a shared vault to spend it in. And that is perhaps the paradox Socrates faced. He wanted truth, but the method required a listener who could endure the wrong answers as well as the right ones, who could stay open when curiosity threatened to turn into contempt for the crowd as beliefs. The danger isn't that doubt is dangerous in itself. It's that doubt without direction becomes a kind of armor against change, a shield against the very truth it seeks to protect. What, then, is the alternative to this double-edged sword? The answer is not to abandon doubt, but to temper it with a sense of purpose. Question everything, yes, but with a boundary that preserves human connection, that honors the limits of what a conversation can accomplish in a moment, and that recognizes when a belief is a living practice, not a sculpture to admire from afar. The method, properly used, is a shield against dogma. Misused, it becomes a wedge that splits us from one another. SFX, soft_chime, 0. 5. The turning point arrives when we stop treating questioning as a test of who is right and start treating it as a practice of how to live with better questions. Socrates showed that the path to wisdom begins with a keen suspicion of certainty. But the path does not end with the elimination of all certainties. It ends with a map that guides us through ambiguity, with humility as the compass and courage as the fuel. Think of a craftsman who tests a blade not to prove the metal is weak, but to prove it can cut through the falsehood that binds us. The blade is the method. The edge is discernment. The handle is responsibility. If the craftsman knows when to temper steel and when to reforge it, The tool serves not only to reveal truth, but to empower communities to act on what they find, to rebuild what has been worn away by fear, to restore trust where doubt has hollowed it. SFX, Breath, 0. 6. The dark side invites us to ask whether our questions are aimed at understanding or at domination. It asks, are you constructing faith with a hinge of skepticism? Or are you destroying faith with a wind of cynicism? If the aim remains inquiry, the method can still liberate. If the aim becomes control, the method inevitably corrodes the very ground it claims to defend. So where does that leave us here now? The answer lies in balance. Skepticism as a discipline, not a weapon. Curiosity as a shared practice, not a private conquest. To approach Socrates today is to borrow a lantern from history and carry it into the present-esque crowded room. The room is loud, the walls are thin, and behind every confident claim, a question waits. The question invites you to listen, to pause, to weigh, to decide what matters and what must be let go. In the end, the dark side is not a verdict on Socrates. It's a mirror for our own habits. We can choose to wield doubt with care, to let it sharpen both our thinking and our empathy. We can decide that the highest form of questioning is not victory over others, but clarity within ourselves. A discipline that keeps us honest with our own motives and with the world we inhabit. And when you walk away from the dialogue with a calmer, closer version of the truth you were seeking, you'll feel something ordinary and rare. A quiet confidence that you can hold a line between doubt and belief without losing your humanity. Open questions will still linger, but they won't imprison you. The dark side remains a warning light, not a wall. Questioning is a craft, not a cage, and through it, perhaps we learn to live with questions that actually help us grow. Not simply questions that keep us debating forever. And if the method becomes a mirror that never stops reflecting, how do we avoid drowning in our own questions? The answer is not to stop asking, but to learn its rhythm of release, to pause, to listen, to choose which questions move us toward actions that heal rather than unravel. In modern classrooms, teachers who adopt Maieutic prompts report higher engagement. As students feel they're co-creating the landscape of meaning rather than passively receiving it. Yet the same prompts can be weaponized. A relentless catalog of doubts that erodes trust more than it cultivates understanding. The skill is not the act of questioning alone, but the intention behind it. SFX, gentle_wind, 0. 5. Consider the craftsman again. The blade must be tested, yes. But the craftsman also reshapes the metal with care. So too the questioner must temper inquiry with care for the person across the table, for the shared fate of the community, for the possibility that some beliefs anchor us amid chaos. The method should function as scaffolding, not as scaffolding against life itself. What about power? In a society that worships certainty, the one who asks the right questions can seize the role of. But the Socratic paradox remains. The more you expose others to questions, the more you are exposed yourself. The elenchus, when practiced generously, becomes a mutual apprenticeship in humility. When practiced badly, it becomes a performance, a ritual of humiliation that teaches nothing but fear. SFX, soft_chime, 0. 5. So how do we guard against the dark side in the age of screens? By naming the aim, not to win the argument, but to refine the shared map, not to annihilate beliefs, but to illuminate their dependencies, their premises, their emotional ballast. We learn to distinguish between questions that deepen comprehension and questions that merely signal cleverness or contempt. In the right hands, skepticism becomes a technique for solidarity, a way to test our own biases while inviting others to do the same. The deepest insight may be this: inquiry is not the denial of truth, but its intensification. The light reveals flaws, but it also reveals boundaries where truth cannot yet reach. The Socratic method invites us to stand at the edge of a cliff of uncertainty and decide whether to jump with caution or to step back and chart a safer route. Both paths require courage. SFX, heartbeat_soft, 0, 7, and here is the turning point. The method's power lies not in the final word, but in the durable habit of reframing, recalibrating, and recommitting to clarity. If we abandon dogma for doubt, we must also abandon cynicism for care. The method becomes a compass that keeps us moving toward togetherness even when the terrain is rough. As you walk away from the dialogue in your own life, you carry not a weapon, but a practice, a way to hold complexity without fracturing your sense of purpose. You hold the line between skepticism and trust, between critique and empathy, between the necessity of doubt and the obligation to act. The dark side fades when doubt is tethered to responsibility, when questions aim to illuminate, not to terrorize. And perhaps in that balance, we rediscover a form of wisdom that Socrates himself would recognize. A wisdom that does not pretend to own certainty, but promises to steward possibility. In the age of screens, the question becomes a social instrument as much as a cognitive tool. A town hall, online voices colliding, claims clashing. The room buzzing with certainty needs more than bold questions. It needs pauses, paraphrase, and a shared horizon. The healthy method invites a yes that can be refined, a doubt that can be redirected toward collective action, a belief that can survive scrutiny because it is strong enough to be improved. SFX, keyboard_typing, 0, 3. So here are 3 practical commitments that keep the method humane and effective. First, pause before you press send or speak, giving your future self a moment to cool the heat. Second, restate the other's point in their own words, not as a caricature, but as a doorway to understanding. Third, and with a concrete, plausible action you can both stand behind, or at least with a shared understanding of the problem you seek to solve together. If you can carry those 3 habits into conversations, you turn the elenchus from a hammer into a chisel, a tool that reveals layers, not a weapon that fissures a bridge. The dark side remains a warning light, a reminder that skepticism without care corrodes trust and erodes the very grounds we stand on. But used with intention, doubt becomes a light that guides, not a blade that wounds. The final truth Socrates hinted at was not the conquest of others, but the refinement of our own minds and our shared worlds. To question everything is to take responsibility for what we build with others. To acknowledge that truth is not a solitary crown, but a communal practice of living well among others. So walk forward with curiosity, yes, but with a gentle discipline that honors both truth and the humanity that pursues it. And when you step into the next conversation, carry that balance with you, a mind capable of doubt, a heart ready to listen, and a faith that some questions are worth carrying even when the